Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling of heat that just doesn't quit? Not just a single hot afternoon, but days, days upon days of really oppressive, sweltering temperatures, the kind that just wears you down, makes you feel sluggish, and frankly, can be dangerous. That feeling is what we're focusing on today. We're taking a deep dive into extreme heat events. We're looking at those extended periods of unusually hot conditions, the ones that go way beyond typical summer weather. And to guide us, we've really dug into the sources you shared, some key reports from the CDC, the World Meteorological Organization, recent news, and other scientific assessments.
Right. And our mission here really is to get past just the headlines. We want to truly understand these events. What defines them? How do they even form? What are their big impacts on people's health, on society, the environment, and crucially, how the science in these sources draws that really clear line to climate change, how it shows it's making the problem, well, worse.
Yeah, and this isn't just some abstract scientific topic, is it? It really hits close to home for a lot of people. The science is telling us pretty clearly that extreme heat is projected to get much more frequent, more severe in many places, and that increases risks for, well, everyone, but especially for the most vulnerable folks among us. So, yeah, let's get into it. We often hear the term heat wave, but the sources, they define extreme heat event quite specifically, don't they? It's more than just one record hot day.
Exactly. Yeah, the definition that really comes out from these sources is about duration and intensity compared to what's normal for a place. It's an extended period, often, several days or even longer, of unusually hot and maybe humid weather, substantially hotter than what's typical for that exact location, that specific time of year. And critically, that unusual heat has the real potential to harm human health. Some definitions even specify, at least 5 consecutive days meeting certain heat criteria.
Right. So it's the length of it and how different it is from the usual weather that makes it extreme and, well, dangerous. How does the atmosphere actually, cook up one of these lasting heat spells? What's happening up there?
Typically, it involves a high-pressure system way up in the upper atmosphere. You kind of think of it like a big dome or maybe a lid just settling over a region. Now, when this system gets strong and just stays put, sometimes called a blocking pattern, it forces air downwards. And as that air sinks, it compresses, warms up, and dries out. This sinking air also stops clouds from forming easily. So fewer clouds mean more direct sun hitting the ground, which heats the surface even more. And sometimes surface winds can also kind of push hot air from another area into the region that's already heating up.
Huh. It sounds like a perfect storm, atmospherically speaking. A dangerous trap for heat. The sources you shared also included some pretty stark reminders of just how deadly these events have been historically.
They really did. The July 1995 heat wave in Chicago is a grim example right here in the U.S. It was this extended period of really unusually high temperatures compared to their average, and it led to an estimated death toll of over 650 people. And globally, you look at the 2003 heat wave in Europe, just devastating. France alone reported something like 14,800 deaths. Numbers like that really drive home that extreme heat isn't just uncomfortable, it's a major, major weather hazard.
And that hazard gets worse in cities, doesn't it? The sources talk about this thing called the urban heat island effect.
Oh yeah, that's a huge factor. Cities are built with materials like concrete and asphalt, right? These things just soak up and hold on to enormous amounts of heat. Plus, you've got tall buildings that can block cooling winds, and often there's just not enough green space, trees, and parks, which normally cool things down through evaporation. The result? Urban areas can be, up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the surrounding countryside. This effect makes heat waves not just hotter in cities, but also longer and more severe for the people living there.
Okay, so we've got the definition, the mechanics, some history, and how cities make it worse. Let's pivot now to the direct impact on people. Health. The sources were really clear about the spectrum of danger here.
They were. They showed that extreme heat can trigger a whole range of health issues. It starts with milder things, maybe heat rash or feeling really tired. Then it can progress to more serious stuff like heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and then all the way up to the really life-threatening emergency, heat stroke. And crucially, it also makes existing medical conditions much worse. People who are already sick become way more vulnerable.
And the numbers on deaths.
Mm-hmm.
They were particularly striking, weren't they?
They reveal something pretty startling, actually. Extreme heat, it isn't just a nuisance. It's actually been a deadlier weather event in the United States than things like hurricanes or tornadoes, at least for a significant period. The sources state that from 2000 through 2009, heat waves were the leading cause of weather-related deaths. We're talking 23% compared to other things. And over a slightly longer period, 1999 through 2009, extreme heat played a role in over 7,800 deaths just in the U.S.
Wow. And I think I saw something in the report suggesting those numbers might even be low and underestimates.
Yes, that's right. Several studies cited suggest the official death toll, which often only counts deaths directly caused by heat stroke, could be significantly higher. When you include deaths where heat was a contributing factor, like making a heart condition worse, the real number might be, well, potentially up to 6 times higher in some areas they studied. It just highlights how tricky it is to fully capture the human cost.
So beyond heat stroke and making existing conditions worse, what other specific health risks did the sources link to extreme heat?
Well, they point to connections with acute kidney injury. That's a serious concern, especially for people doing hard physical work in the heat. They also mention things like poor sleep quality, which affects everything, really, and complications during pregnancy, stuff like low birth weight, preterm birth. Plus, it can cause existing heart and lung diseases to get worse faster. And it's even been linked to epidemics of chronic kidney disease in certain groups, like outdoor workers who face that long-term exposure day after day.
Okay, so clearly heat affects everyone, but some groups were definitely hit harder. Who did the sources identify as being most at risk?
Yeah, the sources paint a pretty clear picture there. It's often this tragic mix of age, health, and socioeconomic factors. And it's made worse by where people live and work. We're talking about very young children, say under 4, older adults over 65, people with physical disabilities or cognitive impairments, those living in poverty or who are socially isolated, the homeless population. Even certain prescription medications can increase your risk. And then there are community factors, like not having easy access to air conditioning or living in one of those urban heat islands we talked about. And of course, outdoor workers and athletes, they're just inherently more likely to get heat sickness because of the physical exertion and risk of dehydration.
That really brings us to the big picture connection that the sources kept emphasizing climate change. They seem very direct about the link between rising global temperatures and these extreme heat events.
Oh, they are completely unambiguous. The sources clearly state the Earth is warming up primarily because of human activity. Specifically, it's the buildup of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane in the atmosphere, mostly from burning fossil fuels. These gases act like a blanket, trapping heat, causing average global temperatures to rise. And that rise is the fundamental engine driving climate change and these heat events.
And the levels of these gases are way beyond anything we've seen before, right?
Yes, the reports really highlight that. Atmospheric concentrations of CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, they're at the highest levels in at least the last 800,000 years. Carbon dioxide specifically, it hit 420 parts per million in 2023 and just kept climbing in 2024. And a really critical point they make is that CO2 just hangs around in the atmosphere for generations. So the heat trapping effect we're causing now is very, very long lasting.
Okay, so with this warming already happening, what do the sources project for the future of extreme heat? Are we just seeing the beginning of this?
The scientific consensus presented in these sources is, while it's clear and pretty stark, climate change is expected to make extreme heat events longer, more severe, and significantly more frequent. And this trend holds true across different climate models, different scenarios for future emissions, though, of course, how bad it gets depends a lot on how quickly we reduce those emissions.
More frequent. How much more frequent are we talking?
The projections are quite dramatic, actually. Take an extreme heat event that might currently happen, say, once every 20 years in your area. By the end of this century, that same kind of event could be happening every 2 to 4 years in most parts of the U.S., especially if emissions stay high. And the number of days hitting, say, 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more, that's projected to increase dramatically across the country.
Wow. And it's not just that they'll happen more often. The sources also say they'll last longer and actually feel hotter.
Exactly. Yeah, increases in the average temperature mean the heat waves themselves will stretch out longer. The longest heat events occurring within a 20-year period could become 10, maybe even 20 days longer in most of the country under the warmer scenarios. And fundamentally, as the average temperature goes up, what we consider hot weather, even record hot weather, will simply be hotter than it used to be.
Hotter? Can you give a sense of what that feels like? How much hotter?
Well, the sources use some pretty vivid analogies to try and explain it. Projections suggest that by late in the century, again under a higher emission scenario, the summer climate in a place like New Hampshire could feel like North Carolina does now, and Illinois could feel like present-day Louisiana or Texas in the summer. That's a profound shift in what we think of as normal summer heat for those places.
And logically, with all these projected increases, frequency, duration, intensity, the health impacts we talked about earlier are also expected to get worse.
Unsurprisingly, yes. As extreme heat becomes more common, lasts longer, and gets more severe, experts anticipate a direct increase in heat-related health problems and, tragically, deaths. Looking at projections for specific cities, like Chicago, for example, they show a really significant increase in heat-related deaths over the course of the 21st century. And that rise is much, much steeper under scenarios where we don't cut emissions significantly.
Some of the recent reports you included, the ones from May 2025, they felt like a real wake-up call about how fast this is actually unfolding.
They really did. Yeah, those reports indicate there's a high probability, like a 70% chance for the 5-year average, that global annual temperatures will average more than 1.5 degrees Celsius warming above pre-industrial levels within the next 5 years. There's even an 86% chance that at least one of those years will cross that 1.5 degree mark individually. Now, technically, a single year going over doesn't break the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, but wow, it's a really clear signal about the increasing risks and how close we're getting to these critical thresholds. There's even a small chance temperatures could hit 2 degrees C warming within this decade. The phrase from those reports that really stuck with me was that record temperatures immediately become the new normal.
Record temperatures immediately become the new normal. Yeah, that really lands. It underlines that this isn't just about temporary spikes anymore. We're fundamentally shifting the whole baseline. And extreme heat, it's just one piece of a much bigger picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources also touched on broader interconnected consequences of all this rising heat.
Absolutely. They showed how this warming affects systems all across the planet. A huge point is the ocean's role. It absorbs something like 90% of the extra energy trapped by greenhouse gases. Think about that 90%. Ocean heat content reached its highest level ever recorded in 2024, looking back over 65 years of observations, and each of the past 8 years has set a new record. What's really worrying is the speed of change. The rate of ocean warming in the last 2 decades has more than doubled compared to the period between 1960 and 2005.
And what happens when the ocean stores all that extra heat? What are the sort of downstream?
Well, it does a lot of things, none of them good. It degrades marine ecosystems, leads to biodiversity loss. It provides more fuel for intense tropical storms and hurricanes. And it's a major driver of sea level rise, both from the water expanding as it warms and from melting ice. The sources are really clear that this level of ocean warming is basically irreversible on human timescales. We're talking hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So these impacts are locked in for a long time. And related to that is ocean acidification. As the ocean absorbs more CO2 from the air, the surface water actually becomes more acidic. This is happening right now. It's projected to continue, and it makes it harder for marine life like shellfish and corals to build their shells and skeletons. That impacts fisheries, aquaculture, entire ecosystems.
And sea level rise itself is also picking up speed beyond what was previously projected.
Yes, exactly. Global average sea level in 2024 was the highest since we started tracking it accurately with satellites back in 1993. And the rate of rise has significantly accelerated. It's more than doubled from about 2.1 millimeters per year in the 90s to 4.7 millimeters per year in the last decade or so. And that rise is already causing damage to coastal areas, infrastructure, ecosystems around the world.
And the ice, the frozen parts of the world, the cryosphere, they're showing clear signs of impact too.
Definitely. The sources pointed out that the period from 2022 to 2024 saw the biggest loss of glacier ice globally in any 3-year period since records began back in 1950. We're talking significant ice losses in places like Norway, Sweden, Svalbard, even the tropical Andes. This melting adds to sea level rise, of course, but it also critically affects long-term water security for millions of people who depend on that meltwater for drinking, for farming, for generating power.
These huge physical changes must have real economic consequences too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Heat waves directly hit the economy. They reduce worker productivity, especially for outdoor jobs. They disrupt farming and industrial processes. They damage infrastructure that wasn't built for such extreme heat. Think buckling roads, strained power grids leading to outages. Some studies suggest heat waves could actually shrink the global economy by around 1% by the middle of this century. And the sources give a specific example. A marine heat wave off Chile caused about $800 million in losses for their aquaculture industry because so many fish died. And the impacts on farming and livestock are pretty severe too. Heat waves stress crops, they can scorch leaves, reduce yields. Animals suffer heat stress too, which means they eat less, they get sick more easily, vaccines might not work as well, and sadly, more animals die.
Yeah, we also saw connections between extreme heat and other kinds of disasters like wildfires and even floods.
That's right. It's kind of a double whammy sometimes. Heat waves, especially when they happen alongside droughts, create those tinder-dry conditions that fuel bigger, more intense wildfires. But then, Paradoxically, because warmer air can hold more moisture, extreme heat waves can sometimes be followed by really intense downpours and devastating floods. The sources mentioned the 2022 heat wave in Pakistan, which contributed to glacier melt and was then followed by catastrophic flooding.
Wildlife doesn't escape these changes either, I imagine.
Not at all. No. Extreme heat puts immense stress on land animals, on vertebrates. Estimates suggest a really worrying percentage, maybe 10% to 40%, depending on how emissions go, could be significantly affected by the end of the century. And in the oceans, marine heat waves can cause mass die-offs of fish and allow invasive species to take over, really disrupting those ecosystems. And one final impact the sources noted is how heat makes air pollution worse. High temperatures actually speed up the chemical reactions that create ground-level ozone pollution, especially in cities. Ozone levels can be like 20% higher during heat waves, so you get this double burden, the heat stress plus worse air quality, which adds to the health risks and mortality.
Wow. That's a lot of interconnected escalating challenges. Sounds pretty grim. But the sources did offer a really crucial note of optimism, didn't they? That many of these heat-related health effects are actually preventable.
Yes, and that's such a critical takeaway. It's really important. While the big climate trends are deeply concerning, what we do individually, what communities do, can genuinely save lives and reduce a lot of suffering. The sources highlighted that many cities have actually developed and put in place successful extreme heat plans over the last, say, 30 years.
What do those effective programs tend to involve? What makes them work?
While they often have strong coordination between different city departments, health, emergency management, public works, they usually include really robust public information campaigns, making sure people know the risks and know what to do. And importantly, they focus specifically on reaching those vulnerable populations we talked about earlier. Often, these heat plans are built into broader disaster preparedness efforts, recognizing that heat is a serious hazard, just like a flood or a storm.
And I guess as these events are projected to get more common and more severe, those programs will need to keep evolving, right?
Exactly. That's the challenge for public health officials now. They need to develop and implement programs that are flexible enough, resilient enough to cope with the kind of extraordinary conditions that climate projections suggest are coming. It really requires thinking ahead, planning, and building that capacity now.
Okay, so for you listening right now, based on all this information, what can you actually do to protect yourself and maybe help others during a heat event?
Yeah, the sources offer some really clear, practical guidance. First off, stay informed, pay attention to weather forecasts and any extreme heat alerts from your local officials. Second, learn the signs of heat sickness. Things like really high body temperature, skin that feels hot, it might be dry, or it might be weirdly moist, a fast pulse, confusion, feeling nauseous. If you see those signs in yourself or someone else, get medical help immediately. Don't wait.
And just the basic steps for staying cool day to day.
Right. Prioritize spending time in air-conditioned places if you can. Public libraries, community pooling centers, even shopping malls can be good options. If you have to be outside, stick to the shade as much as possible. Drink plenty of water throughout the day. Seriously, don't wait until you actually feel thirsty. Keep sipping. And try to avoid lots of alcohol or super sugary drinks, as those can actually dehydrate you. Wear clothing that's light, loose-fitting, and light-colored. And try to limit strenuous outdoor activity, especially during the hottest part of the day, usually midday through the afternoon. If you must be active, pace yourself. And finally, and this is so important, look out for each other. Check on neighbors, friends, family members who might be older, live alone, or have health conditions. Make sure they're okay and staying cool, and never, ever, under any circumstances, leave infants, children, or pets alone in a parked car, not even for a minute. The temperature inside a car can skyrocket to deadly levels incredibly fast.
Wow. Okay. We have certainly covered a lot of ground here, from what exactly defines an extreme heat event and how it forms, through the really serious health impacts and who's most at risk, to that clear scientific link with climate change and those pretty sobering projections for the future. We also touched on all those wider impacts on the ocean's ice, economies, and importantly, finished with steps for being prepared and preventing the worst outcomes.
Yeah, I think the key message is that these events are far more than just uncomfortable. They are genuinely dangerous, even deadly. And the sources present this really clear scientific consensus. Climate change, driven by those long-lasting greenhouse gas emissions, is undeniably making them more frequent, longer, and more intense. And the consequences are widespread, affecting our health, our economies, the environment, and these huge global systems like the oceans and glaciers.
Right. And those recent reports just underscore that this isn't some distant future problem. We're seeing it play out now. with a high likelihood of crossing those critical warming thresholds really soon, signaling even tougher impacts are probably on the way.
But, and it's really important, but while the scale of the challenge is huge and the projections are stark, the sources also give us that vital piece of hope. Heat-related illness and death are largely preventable. Effective public health programs, combined with informed actions by individuals like you, can and absolutely do save lives.
So as you think about everything we've discussed in this deep dive, considering that record temperatures are, as the report said, becoming the new normal, and these extreme heat events are projected to become much more frequent and severe, driven by factors like greenhouse gases and ocean warming that are essentially irreversible on our timescales. What does this mean for the long-term resilience of your community, your local infrastructure, even your own daily life and routines? How does knowing all this change the way you think about heat, not just as discomfort anymore, but as a growing, potentially life-threatening hazard that demands we adapt and act?